When we're working with Photoshop, we're working primarily in layers. Everything that we do and everything that comes into Photoshop is happening through the layers panel right here. If you don't have your layers panel open, you can get it open going to the window menu, just down to layers. And typically you want to be working in the workspace called Essentials. So if I go to the upper right here, I can see that I'm in the Essentials workspace. There's others that you can see what they show you and see if one suits your working style more, but typically the Essentials by default brings up everything we need, and that would include the layers panel. And if you do find that you have your panels set up in a certain way that you enjoy working, you can actually go to new workspace and create a new workspace from that setup, and then you can have it as a default in your application, or you can go to it when you need it. So through the layers window, the layers panel here, as I said, this is kind of where everything happens. We always want to designate what layer we want to be working on, and then we're moving layers around and so on. So the first thing, when we open a new document, a new image that hasn't had any work done to it, it's going to open with this locked background layer. That's the default layer. Right now, even if I go to my move tool, I can't do anything. It'll tell me I have to convert this to an active or normal layer. So I can do that by double clicking on the layer itself, either on the name or just the body of the layer here, and it will give me this new layer window where I can name it if I like. I'm not going to name it right now, but I can just say OK. And that makes it a layer that I can actually start working on. So even with my move tool here, I can move it. That's something we have to be careful of as well. One click and drag that we may not notice is going to move things around, and once you have a lot of layers in a document, you start noticing that, or you may not even notice that things are being adjusted that you didn't intend to adjust. So it's just being careful once you have that layer moved. I just did Command Z to move it back there. So this layer is now unlocked. It's named layer 0, so it's the first and only layer in the document. And then when we're working with layers between documents, if we want to merge images, if we want to work on something and then take it to another document, we can drag and drop layers. So I'll go to this other document that I have opened, go to the layers panel, and I'll click and drag this layer onto the tab. That'll activate this document, but I have to drag right into the body of the image, right into the image space, and then when I let go, that will bring that image, that layer, into this document. Then I can move it and adjust as necessary. So for example, in this case, if I want to merge the two, I can play with the image modes. So I'm selected on this layer that I just brought in. That little eye turns it on and off. I'm selected on it. I can go to where it says normal, that's the layer mode, and I can see what the different modes are going to do. And that's the interaction between these two layers. Once just rolling over, we can see it's showing us what it's going to do, and once I select one, that's what it will decide to do. And then I can, of course, do more adjustments to it. I can adjust the opacity. That's how high or low the see-through value is. And I can adjust the fill, which in a way is kind of like the opacity until you start doing different things. This is just a basic new layer right now, so the fill and the opacity are quite similar. So we're always selecting a layer we want to work on. In this case, if I want to scale it, I've selected that layer. I'll go to the Edit menu and I'll go to Transform, and I can also do Command T for free transform. I'll go to Transform and Scale. And in earlier versions of Photoshop, really in the last couple, they've eliminated the need to hold Shift when we scale. It's a little confusing because in Illustrator and InDesign, we still have to hold Shift when we're scaling. In Photoshop, you no longer have to, and I think the primary reason is that in Photoshop, you're working with images that we truly don't want to skew, and the assumption is that if you are scaling in Photoshop, you don't want to skew an image. But if you do want to skew it, if you want to scale something more freehand, you can hold Shift down and that will allow you to skew it. Let go of Shift and it'll go back to that constrained proportion. So using the transform tool, I can scale it, I can rotate, so I can go transform, rotate, I can do a skew, I can distort perspective. These need to be kind of played with in a way. You can see what selecting perspective will do, but you can also undo before you've actually activated that scaling or that transform. And so I can move it into place. I'm working on that layer, but I'm working actively in the image. And then with that bounding box, if I like what I've done and I want to go through with that, then I can go to the check mark up at the top here, or I can just press enter or return and that will activate it. So now that's been done. Now one thing to think about with that is with Photoshop, I'm just going to undo this. With Photoshop, we're always trying to work non-destructively. And what that means is essentially we're trying to make edits that we can come back from. We don't want to make edits that we can't come back from. Meaning if we do something to a layer, directly to a layer, and we've run out of undos or we've run out of selections in the history of the document. So there's a history panel and that allows us to step backwards in time essentially. According to what we've done, you can see it opened here and we did our transform and so on. Once we've run out of all that, we're kind of on our own with the document. So we want to work non-destructively. We don't want to leave ourselves with the inability to go back and adjust. So in that case, if we are scaling a layer, for example, we would want to make a copy of that layer. So I can drag a layer to what's called the new layer icon down here beside the trash can in the layers panel and make a copy. Then I can turn one off with the little eye, do my Command T and scale it down and move it, and then I know I've worked directly to that layer, I've changed the size of it, and in this case I've made it smaller. So thinking back to resolution, I made it smaller. If I go back and scale it again bigger, then I've reduced the quality of that. So that's why I made a copy. I always call these just in case layers. Just in case I don't like this, I can go back to this. And if I was making it larger, we also have to remember that even if I took this one and made it larger, I'm reducing the quality of those pixels. So going smaller is great. That's increasing the quality of this portion of the now document with two layers or two images in it. However, to go back and size that up, that wouldn't be a good idea. That would be reducing quality. So having those just in case layers is important. Now, if we're working on something and we want to work non-destructively in terms of adjusting colors, adjusting contrasts, making more visual adjustments, then we want to work with what's called the adjustment layers here. And I'll show you, when you're working with layers, you can of course drag and drop them, move them above and below one another and so on. But one of the early penchants with new use of Photoshop is to start making adjustments, understandably, and that's what Photoshop is for. But going to the image menu and going to adjustments is something that understandably is kind of the instinct. You go to the adjustments and you make those necessary adjustments, but we'll see what happens here. If I go to hue saturation, for example, I'm selected on that layer. I go to hue saturation and I'll click on colorize, and all of these things you do have to play with. You have to take your time, see what happens when you click this and unselect it and so on. And you do get used to them. Learning Photoshop really does take experimentation because it's just the options are so vast. So I'll change this up a bit I'll kind of be a little bit overt with it so we can see the change. And I say, okay. Well, what that did was directly affect that layer. You can see even on the layer thumbnail, it's changed. I've made a true change to that image. So were I to send this out, for example, for approval, or someone else had to look at it and approve or disapprove, and they maybe said, can you pull back a bit on the blue? Well, I'm pretty much at the point now where if I had closed this document, no, I can't just do undo. I actually have to redo what I did. So instead, what we do, I'm going to do undo here, Command Z. What we would do, instead of using the image adjustments in this image layer, and by the way, you do want to avoid anything auto tone, auto contrast, auto color. If you're an experienced user in Photoshop, you'll know when you can get away with those. If it's just a quick job where you don't really need any high quality or very fine-tuned adjustments, yeah, you can maybe get away with those. I myself do not use them. And earlier in tutorial, I believe I mentioned turning off auto select as well. Anything auto in Photoshop really is to be avoided. So instead of using these adjustments here, we would go to an adjustment layer. And I'll show you, we'll try to replicate what we did, and I'll show you with hue saturation, two things. So when I select this adjustment layer, and it's that little black and white cookie icon there, I'll choose hue saturation, and then we can see it's giving that new layer, that's the adjustment layer, and it's acting as a filter above everything that's beneath it. All of these layers beneath it are going to be affected by that. And when I created that layer, it brought up the properties panel here. So this is where I'm changing in reference to that adjustment layer. Now you can see the thumbnail on that adjustment layer reflects in white, it's reflecting the full coverage of what's going to be affected. So if I choose colorize here, and then I start to play around with the tabs, we can see everything, the image that I started with on the layer beneath it, and the image below is being affected. Well, I may not want that. I may want to just do what was on the layer that I was selected on before, the layer that I brought in, that portion of the image. So I'm going to take this adjustment layer, drag it to the trash. I can get rid of it. I'm not going to even adjust it. I'm just going to get rid of it. So when making that adjustment layer, I could have designated that I just want it to cover that portion of the image. The way I would do that is hold Command down, or on a PC it would be Control, and I'll Command click on the thumbnail of that layer. So I'll Command click, and it gives what's called a selection. We'll talk about selections in more detail later. And what that did, these little marching ants, we call them, that's saying that on this layer, I'm working on this portion of the image. Well, on this particular layer, it only has that portion. So what it did was the command click on the thumbnail selects whatever is on that layer. If I command click on this thumbnail, it selects the whole area because that image is covering the whole area. So I'll command click here. And then if I want to make sure that I'm selected on that layer, you can see it's a little brighter gray than the others, because if I was selected on this one, now it's choosing that area of the image below. So we want to make sure we've selected what we want to work on using the selection tools. Again, we'll talk about those later, but in this case, we did the command click to select what's on that layer. And we want to make sure we're selected on the correct layer. So we say the area of the layer and the layer we want to work on. Now when I add my adjustment layer, and I'll choose a different one this time. I'll do curves. And we get the properties panel up, and you can see the white space in the thumbnail of the adjustment layer is covering only the portion that I designated. So then I can make my adjustments, and I'll just be pretty loud with the adjustment here so we see it. And what's happening is it's just acting as a filter. So if I send this out for approval, or I just want to change it myself, whatever the case may be, I don't have to start over. I can delete the layer, put it in the trash. I can turn it off. I can work with the adjustments of the layer modes. So choosing a different layer mode. I can change the opacity. I can do everything I would do with a normal layer. With this adjustment layer, I can also go and work again with the properties of it. I can kind of make those adjustments. It makes this infinitely adjustable, and that's the non-destructive editing aspect. It's not being destructive to that original layer. Now, the other thing I can do is, this is kind of acting as a mask. You can see it even says layer mask thumbnail. So that adjustment layer is something that I can modify. So clicked on that mask. Right now, I'm clicked on the layer. You can see the little selection around that. Clicked on the mask there. I can go to my brush tool. I'm going to go over here to the brush. And you can see what the brush does in these little videos. But we have the white space in that thumbnail designating where the adjustment is happening. If I go to my brush, once I click that tool, it will bring up top my brush specifications, and we have a size of, it started with 220 or 250, and the hardness is referring to the edge of the brush. The finer edge at 100% hardness or 0 hardness is a very soft edge. I'll just press return here to close that. And then the opposite of white, of course, being the black, I'll make sure that from my default swatches here, I'm select on black. I'll go over into my image. I'm selected on the mask area here. I'll go into my image. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And what I can do is choose my left or right brackets to change the size on my keyboard. So the bracket keys, left or right, will change the size of that. And if you're seeing your brush like this, with a crosshair, that means your cap locks are probably on. So I'm going to turn mine off again. So selected on that, but working on the image, I'm just going to drag and kind of sweep across there. And what that's doing, we can see on the thumbnail, it's softening the edge. So I'm adding a little bit of black to reduce the coverage of that adjustment layer. It's still non-destructive, of course. I'm still working non-destructively, because if I wanted to get that back, I can switch back this little arrow right here to white, choose my brush again, and then go back and refill that. Of course, in this case, I'm not not selected on the right area, so I'm just going to go do that again. Make sure I'm in white. Say OK. And then I have to designate that area. So I'll command click there again, and I'll fill in the white. So what it was doing, I was adding white without the selection, so it was doing stuff to everything behind it. You can see if I deselect, command D, or go to select and deselect, and then I go onto this adjustments layer with the white, I'm going to be letting it affect everything. And you can see it's going to add that to it. So we do have to be careful. You always have to designate the area that you want to work in. Working with layers, it really is where all of our work resides, but we do want to work as much non-destructively as possible. And that's where, if we think we're going to be making a change to a layer that we can't come back from, then making a copy of that layer like we did with this original of the one we see here, making a copy, turning off that one that we may need to go back to, and then sizing directly, that's fine. We've got one to go back to, but otherwise we should always be working as non-destructively as possible. And I'll show you one other way, And there are several ways to work non-destructively. These are just the basics, but you find that working with these basic non-destructive editing techniques, they sort of lead to others, just with a little bit of experimenting or case by case figuring out what would be the best approach. There's several ways to do anything, any one thing in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do here is add a layer mask to this layer. So I'm selected on this one, and I'm going to get rid of my adjustment layer here. I'm selected on this layer, and I'm going to add a layer mask. So right here, I'll click that, and that does a fill of white on that layer. Now if I want to mask, so remembering that a mask it's going to be hiding what's still there. It's going to appear deleted. Now this is appear to be deleted. This is what we would do instead of erasing. I'll remove the mask just for a moment to show you the difference. So I'll delete that mask, and I'll go to my eraser tool here, which I really try not to use in Photoshop, but I'm going to use it here. So it's acting as a brush. It has the same brush settings up at the top here, and I'm getting rid of all this, and that's erasing. I just erased that content. Go to my move tool, move it down, and whether I'm happy with that or not doesn't matter, because now if I want to come back from that, there's nothing left. If I do my command click on the layer, that's all that it has. That's all that it can select. There's no coming back from that. That's destructive erasing. So I'm going to undo all that, Command Z to the point where it's fine, and then I'll add my layer mask on. Now I'll go to my brush. The opposite of the white fill there is black. So now I can remove. I'm masking away that white. I'm not deleting it. I'm masking it away. I can do that with a brush like this, or if I wanted to, I could be very specific. This is down the road, but I could use what's called the pen tool, and I'll do this very quickly. I could make a very specific selection. This is horribly unspecific. Make a selection of that, and then I can use that as a mask. So I can actually invert this selection, Command-Shift-I, and that gives me a selected area in which to use my masking brush. So I can be quite specified with masking, but the point in this case is that so Command-D will deselect. The point is that I'm not doing anything destructive. That whole image is there. If I do not like what I did, I can just take that mask, either modify it or delete it altogether, and everything's back to where it was. So the layers, we're working with layers all the time. We're trying to work non-destructively. We want to be very aware of which layer we're on, and it really can be easy to accidentally work on another layer. If I select this layer by accident and I go to my brush and I wanted to be brushing something onto this top layer, and I start doing it and nothing's happening, just know that it's all about which layer you're selected on, because things are happening under there. We were just selected on the wrong layer. Okay, so know that it's all happening in the layers panel. There's a lot of settings that we can go through in here, and it really does take some playing around. You can of course group layers. You can hold your Command or Control key down and select multiple layers, or you can click on one and select Shift and get everything in between those, and you can put them in a folder as a group. You can do Command G and it'll do it itself. You can then name that group, and you can also merge layers. You can click on one, and if I do Command E, it will automatically merge to the one beneath it. That makes one layer. I can go into the flyout menu of the layers, and you can see it gives us all new options as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these because the basics are know that you're working in layers, know which one you want to be working on by selecting it, knowing that you want to work on a specific part of a layer through selections, command clicking on the thumbnail, or we'll go through how to actually make specific selections on an area. And that will make, especially working with the adjustment layers, will make working with Photoshop so much more enjoyable and will lead to a lot of other practices. Just finding your own style really does happen through working correctly, non-destructively, but working correctly with the adjustment layers.